Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Um, Today's webinar is focusing on what do we do with all of this space? Please let us know where you're watching us from. I'm Kim Jackson with IFMA, joining you from Houston, Texas. Today promises to be quite a lively debate in the topic of traditional office, work from anywhere, how do we make it work, and again, what do we do with all of this space? Joining us today is Eddy and Darlene, and they are going to have a very interesting conversation with you. We encourage you to put your questions in the chat, and they will get to it as they're able. So, Eddy and Darlene, I'm going to turn everything over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim. And Eddy and I were debating who's going to go first with introductions. And we talked about age before beauty, but that would mean that we both have to reveal our age. And I think we're doing okay here. So anyway, I'm volunteering to go first. So my name is Darlene Pope. I'm the president of Plan On for North America. Plan On, if you're not familiar, is a software company. We're what's called an IWMS, which is an integrated workplace management solution. We do space management, asset management, energy management, real estate management, et cetera. Prior to joining Plan On, I was at WeWork for about 2 years, and I led the smart building and digital workplace initiatives for WeWork. Prior to that, I was at JLL, so I was the global head of the smart building advisory practice for JLL, and that's where I had the fortune of meeting my dear friend Eddy Wagoner. So thrilled that he's going to join us today. But overall, I've spent about 30 years in the smart building / prop tech space. Everything from internet access back in the 90s to in-building wireless to smart buildings to now this conversation about the metaverse and where do we see our buildings and our real estate going in the future. So thrilled to be here. This is a topic that is near and dear to everyone's heart, return to office and what do we do with all this space. So really thrilled to have this conversation with Eddy. Eddy?
Thanks, Darlene. As Darlene mentioned, we met at JLL. I am currently writing, speaking, consulting, and doing some fractional CIO work after 27 years at JLL, where I spent about 20 years as the global CIO for their occupier services division. As Darlene said, we met at JLL and would often have heated discussions about the technology in the workplace. And what I mean by heated is there's a lot of opinions, there's a lot of ideas, there's a lot of options. And so what I always loved about talking with Darlene, and I hope you see this today, is we'll talk those things through to help people understand what's right for them. I'll point out before JLL, I actually got my start as a facility manager as a teenager. I didn't realize it when I got a job working janitorial for that facility management company that was actually where I was going to spend the rest of my life. But I've got a very deep experience with the folks that we're talking to and have loved it, and especially the intersection with digital. Darlene, speaking of that, and without giving away our ages, we've just basically told people we've been around for a long time. And if I think back to even before we met, if I think back even into the late 90s, I can remember telling companies back then, what are you going to do with all this space? Because even before some of the technologies were out, people either didn't know what they have or they had too much space. And so fast forward a couple of decades, we're still having that conversation from a history perspective. And I'm just, you and I have talked, but let's talk about what's changing and why people, even if they've had this problem all these years, why we think they've got to start acting now and why maybe it's different now. The impetus is different than it used to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the reasons I always love having conversations with you is they're heated, they're passionate. We're very passionate about what we do. We're passionate about this industry, and whether we agree or disagree, I think you're one of those people that we can argue vehemently about things that we agree on, which I love. But yeah, let's talk about the history of real estate in general. It used to be that you had to physically get in a car and drive to an office or get on a train and go to an office because that's where your computer was and that's where your telephone was. But that changed, 25 years ago? However, we're still stuck in this traditional work environment of go to a place, sit in a box to do work, even though we don't need that for our computer or our phone or any of our communications for that matter. And I think the biggest challenge right now is what COVID did was level the playing field for everyone. And you're absolutely right, Eddy. I mean, hybrid work is not new. Use of office space or underutilized office space is not new. I remember when I was at JLL and we used to work with corporate clients, one of the first things we would do is a utilization study to see how much of your space are you using, how much of your space do you really need. And even back then, I remember numbers coming back in the 30s and 40s and 50s in terms of percentage of space that was actually being used. So the question is, why now? Why are so many people focused on space now? And I think, again, let's talk pre-COVID. Before COVID, employers did not trust their employees to work from home because they felt like they wouldn't be working. They're going to take their dog for a walk. They're going to do their laundry. they're going to leave early. They're not going to work. And employers wanted to be able to see their employees working so that they knew that they were actually getting work done. And then during COVID, leveled the playing field for everyone. Everyone had to work from home. And all of a sudden it completely changed this conversation to, all right, what do we do now? And even researching for this topic, when you go online and you Google return to office, you're going to get thousands of articles about how companies are trying to handle return to office. And more importantly, why? Why? Why is it that companies are trying so desperately to get people to come back to the office? So I agree with you in terms of this isn't anything new. Office space has been underutilized for decades. It's just that we never knew it before. So I guess my question back to you is why? Why? What is the strong demand for getting people to physically return to an office, and why? Why are companies so obsessed with getting people back to a physical office?
Well, I think so. Before I answer that question, I am going to make a quick statement and maybe a little controversial, and let's see if you agree or disagree. As you were talking, it struck me we would often talk about occupancy planning, and in most of the clients that I worked with, and in most of the real estate organizations, occupancy planning was its own group, quite often separate from facility managers. And we would quite often see facility managers told, here's the space, go manage it. That's the way things have been for a lot of facility managers. And one thing that I think, and why I'm glad IFMA is doing this webinar, I think facility managers have a bigger, important, and smarter role to play in the occupancy planning space than maybe they've ever traditionally been able to, because they're closer to the people. They see more of what's going on than every other discipline in the day-to-day operations of real estate. So I think that's one aspect. I think to that, I think most of the executives, both in the clients, but also in the big real estate groups, they're not close enough to the day-to-day of what people are doing. And in doing that research, I found an argument going on between Kevin O'Leary of Shark Tank fame and Elon Musk. And talk about getting people's opinions going when the two of them talk, but when they go at each other, it's really amazing. Elon Musk wants everybody back. He's been pretty, direct about that. Kevin O'Leary's actually come out, and the man owns 54 companies. And he said 40% of them, direct quote, are never coming back. And he went on to explain why he transitioned from thinking people had to be in the office, had to manage them, to realizing that not only is it not a moral issue if some groups work from home and others don't, but you need to do what's right for the people that need to collaborate, like engineers. He said, I can see engineers needing to be around a table, but in other industry sectors, people need to be able to figure out where they can do the work. And he actually called hybrid work an effective method of project management. And so I think one thing that's changing is a lot of leaders are starting to realize that the way that some of us were brought up, I must see you to manage you, may still be the case, but I can see you through technology. Just like right now, I'm in Chicago, as you can tell by the backdrop. I'm not really sure where you are today, but we can see each other and we can still work together without being physically present. And I think there's an awareness of that. I think a second thing, and then I'll pause to get your reaction to this. I just found a study. Actually, Dr. Elaine Warzala of Clemson University actually posted it on LinkedIn. And it's a study from the University of Michigan and the University of Chicago. It's just been released about a week ago. And it's called The Return to Office and the Tenure Distribution. And what this study found is that return to office policies that are forcing people back are actually causing companies to lose their senior employees. And in leaving them, they're going to competitors with better policies. And those companies with an enforced RTO policy are losing, get this quote, productivity, innovation, and competitiveness. The very three things that people were saying right after COVID that we needed to return to the office for, studies are actually showing, well, no, you're actually hurting that because you're losing the very people you need. And so I think as people are starting to see that and realize that and see some real data, that's starting to change some of that conversation.
Yeah, and so I'm going to start with that one first because I agree, and based on a lot of the research that I did to prep for this as well, when you take a look at J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Tesla, Meta, Microsoft, SpaceX, Apple, all of these companies, you can literally go online and find their return to office policies. You can see the reduction of top talent. There was a recent Washington Post article that talked about, the choices that employees have now, and that a lot of these return to office mandates are actually backfiring because they're losing top talent. And that top talent is going to companies that allow them the flexibility of hybrid work. So it's not necessarily 100% you have to come into an office or 100% you have to work from home, but really giving employees the flexibility of a hybrid environment to be able to come into a physical office when they're most productive in that environment, but also be able to work from anywhere when they're most productive in that environment. So, for example, right now I'm sitting in my home office in Virginia. I've worked in a hybrid environment for 27 years now, including all my time at JLL, my time at WeWork, my time at PlanOn, my time at Realcomm, and my time at Core Advisors. So 27 years. But I work from anywhere. And I think what we're seeing is that most people can work from anywhere because we have the technology to support working from anywhere. But let's back up a little bit. Your other question about occupancy planning. Occupancy planning is different now than it was pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, and there was an evolution of occupancy planning as well, because back in the, I'm gonna date myself here, back in the 90s, we used to design buildings for 150 to 200 square feet per person, right? And you used to get a nice office. And, I always joke that by the time I worked my way up to a corner office, they were all gone. But back in the day, 150 to 200 square feet per person. And then that started to shrink and it came down to, 100 to 120 square feet per person. When I was at WeWork, we were designing for 50 to 60 square feet per person. So occupancy planning has changed as well, because now we don't need as much space for the same number of people. We've also changed the ratios of desks to people. We have the ability to do hoteling. We have the ability to share space that we didn't before. So we're no longer in a 1-to-1 ratio at 150 square feet per person. So occupancy planners have to take a different look at the workplace to determine how much space do you need based on what is your ratio of people to desks? What is the amount of square footage that you're designing for? So if we're going back to, if people are coming back to an office, what we're finding is that people want more space. So the 50 to 60 square feet doesn't work anymore, So even if half the number of people are coming back, the people that are coming back want twice as much space. So you really do have to balance those numbers to be able to understand how much space do I really need. And I think that's the biggest question here. And there is no one size fits all. I read all these articles about what Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, all these other companies are doing. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what Goldman Sachs is doing or what Meta is doing or what Apple's doing or what Facebook. It doesn't matter. What matters is for your organization and for your building and for your employees, what is the right mix of people and desks and space? And that's what the occupancy planners have to take a look at, is how much space does my company need to make sure that I have the ability to provide a safe, healthy, productive environment. And whether that environment is physically coming into an office, whether that environment is coming in for conferences or for meetings or collaboration space, or whether that environment is sitting from home, heads down, or sitting at home and being on a Teams call. There is no one size fits all. So in terms of occupancy planning, completely different than it was 4 years ago. And I think those are the metrics that we really have to take into consideration, and which kind of gets us to the topic of what do we do with all this space? Because it doesn't matter what article you open up, 100% of those articles agree that we need less space, right? The question is, how much less space is needed, and what do we do with all the additional space? So Eddy, I'll kick it back over to you. Like, how do we figure out what the right number is, and what do we do with all this space? How much space are we going to need? How much less space are we going to need? So what are you seeing? What's going on in the market?
So people that know me know it's hard for me to be quiet this long. And if you and I were in a room together, I would have been interjecting. So I'm going to, before I answer your question, I'm going to share a couple of things that I think support some things you said. But you talked about, what do people want? And interestingly, I watched a video that Cushman & Wakefield put out with someone we both know and have worked with, Brian Jacobs. And he was talking to Cushman & Wakefield's chief experience officer. And something that came out of that really struck me. Even if you're measuring space, you aren't measuring what people want. So think about that. I may be in your office sitting and working, but maybe I'm just there because that's what was there. It's not what I really want and need to do my work. And so when you talked about, using metrics and measuring, I think we've got to look at the way that we measured in the past is not what we need to be measuring and looking at in the future. Mm-hmm. Secondly, along that, Phil Kirshner, another person that we've both worked with, does a lot of consulting in the field, recently spent time, and he posted about this on LinkedIn, with a sales team. And what struck him is, he said, quote, "They are over it when it comes to RTO, because for a sales organization, the metrics of how many salespeople are in the office mean nothing. Their metrics are all around closing sales, increasing revenue." And so the success metrics for that organization is going to be completely different than what we would use for, our traditional space metrics. When the salespeople come into the office, what do they need? What are they using it for? Because it's going to be a completely different focus. And how do we create a space that could, or is it possible, help them increase their sales metrics? And so I think that's part of what we need to start thinking about, is how do we, and it's why I think facility managers need to be more involved in this discussion, is how do we widen the way that we measure and look at and drive metrics on space. Now, to come back to your question a little bit, what do we do with all this space? It's interesting, and I'm gonna quote from a couple of the big firms. JLL was just quoted on the BBC saying 48% of clients in major markets are looking to decrease their footprint. CBRE noted that in the NACREF Property Index, I'm reading this without my glasses, so I hope I can see this right, that office has dropped to 22% from a high of 37% in the property index. If you look at, and you alluded to this, a lot of the big investment funds, Goldman Sachs just created a $7 billion with a B real estate fund because they're going to start looking at some of the distressed properties where people are, needing to get rid of it. And so I think when we start talking about what do we need to do with all this space, I think something you said earlier is very key. Stop spending the majority of your time looking at what everybody else is doing. That's still an input, but we need to start spending a lot more time thinking about what do we need for our organization and for a particular location, because I think opportunities are going to start opening up.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned the metrics around return to office. I was looking at a recent Castle System study, showing that it's still hovering over the last year, still hovering at about 50% of the amount of people coming into buildings as it was pre-COVID. 50% less people are coming into the buildings than they were pre-COVID. The other thing that you have to look at, you mentioned, it depends upon your company. Well, it also depends upon what type of building we're talking about, right? So you've got commercial office buildings that are dependent on leasing space. You've got corporate office facilities that, they need to really get a grip on how many people are coming in so they can run the buildings more efficiently. But you've got hospitality, you've got healthcare, you've got so many different building types. And, Eddy, you and I were talking about this in our conversation last week about other industries that have gotten really, really good at understanding their metrics around use of their space. So let's take the airline industry, for example. When's the last time you got on an airplane where you had any open seats? I mean, I'm blown away by the fact that when I get on a plane, almost every seat is filled on that plane. You're not going to get on a plane that's half empty anymore. You take a look at hotels. Hotels have done a really, really good job of measuring metrics and maximizing attendance or maximizing use of their space. And I don't think the real estate industry is anywhere near the level of detail that other industries are in terms of how people are using their space. So if you take a look at, for example, commercial real estate typically refers to occupancy as percentage leased. So if you have a 1 million square foot building and you're 900,000 square foot leased, you're considered 90% occupied, when your foot traffic might only be 50%. So I think one of the metrics we need to start looking at from a commercial standpoint is actually footfall. How many, it doesn't matter if they're paying, everybody's paying the rent every month, that's great. But if only 40 or 50% of the actual employees are coming in, once those leases start coming up for renewal, we're going to be in a big world of trouble, right? Even our own office up in Braintree, Massachusetts, we've got way more space than we need. And I think you're going to find that let's just take the number 50%. If half the companies out there have too much space, what's going to happen to that commercial real estate when those leases come up for renewal?
It's interesting you said that. I just read today a post from Dave Carnes, formerly a broker at CBRE, that's now become a thought leader in this particular topic that we're talking about. And he's a fire starter a bit like us. So let's see your reaction to this. He said, if you've got like so few people coming into the office, like you just mentioned, shut down. I mean, completely turn off lights, power, access to, if you've got half the people coming in, half the floors, force those people to come together on the remaining floors, and then watch the vibe that evolves, see what happens, see how people interact, see how they react to that reduced space, or groups working together, or people working around people that they wouldn't normally work around, and learn from that. And that's how you start thinking about, before you even go and take your next lease or reduce your space, you really need that type of input to figure out the type of space that you're going to need, the type of space that will draw people in. What if you reduced that and people liked coming in and interacting with people? Because there's days where I like to be around people. I'm not doing heads down work. And what if that caused more people to come in and use space on days that they choose to come in and work? That would completely change the way that you would think about space and look at your future space plans. And I think that's one data component outside of the traditional ways of looking at just the what we call the butts and seats that I think people need to start evolving toward and looking at.
Well, and even, the concept of dynamic assignment of space has been around for 20, 25 years. I mean, ever since I've been in the smart building industry as a consultant, we have talked about the ability to measure how buildings are being used, literally building by building, floor by floor, room by room, and starting to put together metrics and graphs and charts and trends and things. And then taking that data and using that data to, first of all, run the building in a more efficient manner on an hour by hour, minute by minute basis, right? So if you're in facility management and you can't tell me how many people are in your building right now, you're probably failing at your number one job, which is energy management, right? And cost reduction. So if the building is running based on an estimated 90% occupancy and there's only 12 people in the building, or if you don't know how many people are in the building, that's miss number one. But the concept of being able to take that data and dynamically assign seats and shut down half the floor. Literally, we've been talking about this for 20 years. So if you have a 1 million square foot building and you're only at 40% utilization on a regular basis, you don't have to open floors 6 through 10. The elevator doesn't go above the 5th floor. You don't turn on the lights. You don't condition half the building. So what does that do to our energy costs and our carbon footprint? It cuts them in half immediately. The challenge with that is that in the past, we haven't had the technology to be able to manage that, right? Because we didn't know how many people were coming in. We didn't have the ability to dynamically assign seats or assign neighborhoods. We didn't have the ability to have this hybrid or flexible workspace, because most people, when they go into an office, they want their desk, right? And even in open seating, what you'll find is everybody still has the same spot. I mean, even when I was at JLL and I used to fly up to the Aon Center in Chicago, we all had open seating, but Dan Probst always sat in the same spot, and Bob Best always sat next to him. When I went, and you always knew whose spot was whose, even though technically it was open seating. So there's also this mindset that has to change, that when you go into the office, you may be working on the 6th floor one day and you might be on the 3rd floor another day. So you also have to change that mindset of, I own this space. But I do think that the industry is ripe for that now. We've been talking about it for 20 years, but now's the time to really put those plans into place, even on a week-to-week basis, because you may have a higher occupancy on Wednesdays than you do on Mondays and Fridays. So how do we allocate space differently on Wednesdays than we do on Mondays and Fridays? So I think we're ripe for it. The technology's there. The question, Eddy, is how do we get the real estate community to embrace that technology and to implement it?
So I think a couple of so much there. I mean, this could be a 3-hour webinar, or maybe nobody would watch it, but you and I could talk about this for 3 hours. One thing, I play in the CIO field also. So in addition to doing like, an IFMA event, I do a lot of CIO events. And what strikes me is the number of major corporations where their CIOs have no clue about the real estate technologies that their organizations are using, technologies that are inside their footprint. So set aside the whole information security risk aspects of that. And IFMA is getting really involved in looking at that and helping facility managers understand the role they play. But a CIO has major responsibilities around that. And I think there's major opportunities for the CIO and their groups to help facility managers understand the opportunities to integrate some of these systems, or to better leverage data across systems and across disciplines. And there's even going to be information inside the organization, outside of real estate, but inside the broader organization, that could benefit real estate. So I think one of the biggest issues or opportunities is, how do we get the real estate group and the corporate technology group, not your real estate technology or your service provider's technology, but your organization's IT group, to understand each other. And when I say understand each other, there's 2 different ways of talking. So you've got to learn some of the, be a little fluent in some of the key concepts, but, also help them understand the challenges that real estate is facing, but also the opportunities around better data and technology. And I know a lot of people think when you go to the IT group, that's where good ideas go to die. I would say, if you think about it, IT groups are a lot like facility managers. People expect the buildings to always be operational and ready when they need it. Same thing with IT. Things either work or they don't work. There's not a lot of gray. It's very black and white. And so there's a lot of similarity in thinking. The IT group is looking to protect. They're looking to protect the dollars. But if you can articulate the opportunity there, it's not asking for IT spend as much as it is, look at what we could save if we could better use our real estate, and then think about the added benefits of better collaboration, more competitiveness, more innovation. that's where you get some real conversations going. So I think that's one thing that people really should start thinking about and focusing on. And there's a lot of us that can help with some of those conversations or get them started. And I know there's an appetite there in that CIO community. It's just, you have to help make it a priority to get those conversations going. I think that's one big, opportunity to really take this to the next level. And by the way, I think we're going to see that, because where I used to meet CIOs and they would go, "What do you do?" I'm starting to meet CIOs and they're saying, I don't think we use our space as efficiently in my organization as we could. And that's a paradigm shift that's been happening after COVID. And so I think that's a C-suite officer that could really help us in this space.
Well, I'll tell you, we've gone from, it used to be said in real estate, location, 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 right? Now, I think we need to change that to data, 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 and really getting your arms around the data that's coming out of your facilities. And I think right now, at least what we're seeing, is the number one data set that our customers are trying to solve for is occupancy and utilization. Please help us get our arms around the use of our space, day to day, hour by hour, room by room, floor by floor, so that we can optimize the space to our organization. And again, it doesn't matter what Meta and Goldman Sachs, it doesn't really matter what their metrics are. Help us get our arms around our metrics. So having been a CIO of a major real estate company, tell me a little bit about the importance of data in real estate, and what are you seeing in terms of, what's the most important data set the real estate owners, whether you're commercial or corporate or hospitality, whatever, what data do you need to get your arms around in this world of hybrid work?
Oh boy, you really do want a 3-hour conversation, don't you? There's so much data and opportunity with the data. I think the key is, before you start looking at the data, take the step back to figure out, what do you need to measure? And it goes to our first conversation when we started this, was it needs to be more than just how many people are in the building. It's what do people really need? Or I use the example of the sales organization. Their metric is increased sales, not necessarily everybody in the office. So I think first, before you start looking at the data and for answers, you need to look at the questions you're asking, and are you asking the right questions? And by the way, I would say, I'm going to put this out there, and somebody prove me wrong. I don't think you can, but I think even within your organizations, every one of your business lines, every one of your groups, whether it's like HR, marketing, finance, they all have slightly different needs. And so if you really want to get it right, and if you really want to make all of your employees productive and happy and innovating, you've got to figure out which each one of those groups need within their group. Then you can start looking at, what data do you need? So to that, I think there's data within the real estate group. There's going to be data from within your broader company, and there's going to be third-party resources. And I know people are going to go, well, that's just like with every project, with every data project. And it is. I think the real estate industry is behind most industries, all industries probably, in its use of data outside of the real estate group. We have quite often historically used our occupancy management stats, and then we get real excited because we got badge data from the security system, which in a lot of organizations is still a service that's under, real estate's purview. But have we gone inside the organization perhaps to tie it to sales? That could be an opportunity to drive some of that. There's a lot of good third-party data, I think, but key to that point, and I know a lot of people have this question because it just came in from Will Tigert in our chat. He's asking, what is the position within the community that can bridge these conversations? IT and the real estate group, who's the facilitator normally in a company to make that happen? I'm going to give my answer, and then Darlene, I'll see if you agree or want to challenge back. I don't think there's a position in the company because it's not happening. And so some of us need to step up. That means if you've got a passion around it, if you have ideas, sometimes you got to take that uncomfortable step of starting to ask the question or, push it. There's external facilitators. Like I said earlier, I'm talking to a lot of people. It's really easy for me to talk to a CIO and say, hey, have you looked at this in your real estate group? And I've done that with a number of, and I'm doing that with a couple of real estate teams and their CIOs right now. But I think more importantly, it's all of us need to start stepping up and asking some of those questions. And then just like you look at your teams and you start finding hidden strengths that you didn't know they had before, where it pops out, you're going to find people on your teams that are able to help facilitate or start the facilitation or participate in it. And they've never done it because either they've never been asked or they've never seen the opportunity.
Yeah. And so here's what has traditionally happened in an organization. There's a group within the organization that needs certain data points. They need certain information, and they set out to find that information. So whether that's facility management has got energy data, corporate real estate may be working on occupancy data, and security's got data, and everybody's got data for what they need. And bridging the gap among all those individual disparate data sets and silos within the organization, I think is absolutely key here. So I love this question because I was also writing down over here, who tracks occupancy data and utilization? Is it HR? Is HR tracking how many people are coming into the office versus working remotely? Is it the security? Is it the responsibility of security to track how many people are in the building and how many people are not? Is it IT? Is IT looking at network logins, and is it IT's responsibility to track utilization? Is it real estate? Is it the corporate real estate department that's counting heads and trying to figure out how much real estate do we need? Is it facility management? Or they can't. So the answer is all of the above. All of the above, all of those different groups need that data. And I think in order to have an effective occupancy or utilization strategy, all of those organizations need to come together and say, what data do we all need? And how do we get that one single source of truth, as opposed to pulling literally five different data sets around our occupancy? Because you got badge swipe data, you got network login data, you got Wi-Fi data that IT can scrape. You've got physical butts and seats data where you're walking around doing head counts. So you've got so many different areas to get that information. And I think the key is breaking down those silos within the organization. And that, in my opinion, should happen at an IT, at a CIO level, because the CIO should play the role in aligning the technology needs and aligning the data strategy for the organization. So I'm curious, Eddy, would you agree with that the CIO should be the herder of the cats, if you will, to try to align all that?
Here we go. I was waiting for this moment. I totally disagree. I think most major CIOs in non-real estate companies would say, I got 10,000 problems and you're not one of them. And it's not that they don't want to do the work or they don't want to help. Think about any organization you've been in. Who gets the majority of the resources? The ones bringing in the revenue. I mean, that's why a company is in business, is to have a goods or service that other people buy. And so quite often real estate, and I know for a lot of my career going in with clients, it's like you're the back office of the back office. We have real estate because we have to, because people got to have somewhere to work, but we're a bank, or we're an automotive company, or we're a technology company. I think we have to change the conversation around why we have the real estate and the benefit that it provides. And again, I'm going to go back to, collaboration, innovation, competitiveness, and we've got to change the conversation on some of that. And you've got to show, instead of it being a cost of the enterprise, because that's the way it's viewed so much right now, you have to show people the benefits of it, or the return on it, if you will. And again, like I said earlier, it's going to be different for different divisions. A manufacturing organization, they absolutely need their manufacturing facilities. And so the way that you manage and run those, and the office space you have in a manufacturing facility is going to be different from your back office tower, if you will, or your headquarters building. And so changing the conversation and helping the CIO understand the benefits, and not just the CIO, it's also business leadership. I think that will change the conversation. But I also think, in addition to talking about data, and what we need to change there, we've got to change us. You know, you mentioned that when you would come into JLL's headquarters back in the day when we were both there, you knew where to find us because we always were sitting in the same places. Now, we would say that's so that when you came to visit, you knew that Eddy was always sitting across from John Forrest and close to Doug Sharp. You could find us. I will tell you, on days when nobody was in the office, I would go in and I still wanted my desk, even though nobody was visiting. Creature of habit. You know, just
Yep,
going
absolutely.
in. So I don't have to have the same airline seat. That's not true. United Airlines exit row. I will look for that every single time. Don't have to have the same hotel room. For some reason, we have to have it in the office. We've got to change that mentality. I think the second thing, and every real estate person I've come across, they first go into this, ooh, no, we can't track. And you know what? Everywhere but in real estate, we track. We let ourselves be tracked. Right now, I am tracking to see when my lunch is going to be delivered here at the house after this webinar is over. I can do two things at once. I'm watching DoorDash, you know, monitoring that. I'll allow myself to be tracked for something that I want or something that I need. And even in your organizations, even though we fall back on data security, and that is very important, there are still ways to leverage the technology in a safe and secure way to deliver the benefits. And so I think we have to change the way we start the conversations. Instead of starting with, we can't do that because information security, it's how do we do this in a secure, safe, efficient, beneficial way?
Absolutely. You know, and everything always comes down to ROI. You know, how do we get the benefit? You know, if there's going to be expense associated with it, what's the ROI? And from an occupancy and utilization standpoint, there are thousands of use cases for that data. I'm going to get the easiest ones in terms of return on investment are, how do you operate the building in a more efficient manner based on the actual number of people who are in this space right now? Building by building, floor by floor, room by room. That's simple. That's right off the top. You know, if you can cut back fans and not condition space that isn't being used, that's huge savings right away. Number two, cleaning, right? Cleaning is one of the top expenses in running a building. Why are we cleaning space that hasn't been used? So being able to take that occupancy information day to day and provide it to the cleaning company at night to be able to say, these are the only rooms that were used today. Don't even step foot in the other rooms, you know, except for regular maintenance or maybe once a week you go in and vacuum them anyway. But those are two immediate areas for savings. Another one that you can look at is food services, right? So if you're aware of what your utilization is on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays, and usually, you know, what we're seeing is that nobody comes in on Mondays and Fridays anymore, right? Everyone, those, and even in some countries, you know, I remember when I used to go over to London all the time, even pre-COVID, nobody comes into the office on Fridays, right? Friday was always a work from home day. So you take that data and you provide it to the food services or give it to the, you know, cafeteria, and we need to order less chicken on Fridays than we do on Wednesdays because we know our utilization is going to be much higher. So in terms of the ROI on getting your arms around utilization data, the use cases are there and they're immediate. The longer term benefit in question is back to our topic. What do we do with all this space? So once you get those immediate benefits from your space utilization metrics, the long-term benefits are right-sizing your real estate portfolio for what do you actually need based on what you said earlier, what people actually want. And we're seeing a lot of our customers are repurposing the workplace, if you will. It's no longer a place where an individual goes into an individual office and closes the door and works individually. It's really about coming into a location for collaboration, right? Because if you're going into an office to work independently, you don't have to go into an office to do that. The only time you really need to physically go is somewhere is if you're going to be collaborating. And then you need to take a look at what type of space you need for that collaboration. So do we need more individual offices or do we need more collaboration space? More conference rooms, more AV areas, more ability to bring in people remotely. And don't even get me started on the metaverse and the future of what our buildings look like in the metaverse. And you look at the work that Henry Massey is doing on the future of real estate in the metaverse. I mean, I've got two college-age kids that spend most of their time on Fortnite and Minecraft and, all of these video games where when you're participating, I don't know if anybody's played Fortnite, but it's like you're there. So can you imagine when we're working with our, AR, the headsets on, and you and I can be sitting in a virtual space that looks exactly like my office, and I can be looking at various people, so what is the metaverse going to do in terms of further reducing the amount of physical space that we need? So I think these are the types of questions that we need to be asking today, not only for, like I said, immediate cost savings, but more importantly, long term, what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 plus years when we need half as much real estate as we currently have built today.
It's again, so much to act and react to there. Always a great conversation. I get made fun of for talking about the metaverse, and you can't go buy it right now. And we're on the Gartner hype curve. There's a little bit of disillusionment going on, but what you just talked about, a couple of key factors. Earlier we talked about look outside of like facilities management and real estate for other data and information. I've had the privilege of, and I can't name them right now, but it's a major game manufacturer. They've got games just like you mentioned. It's you're in the you think you're physically in that place when you're playing their game.
Mm-hmm.
Guess where they see an emerging opportunity in our space? They think they can take what they've built into their games and bring it into our physical world and come after the real estate space. It's the reason they were talking to me. Think about that for a minute. That's a competitor potentially, or a collaborator that we've not dealt with before in our real estate industry. So
but Eddy, we're already...
it's something we need to watch, and it will have an impact. And think about it. It changes completely the way you set up and use the space, because you could see a day when the kids today that are wearing, the goggles are sitting there playing the games. We've all brought things that we've learned in our youth into our adulthood, into our adult careers. And you've seen that, we talk about people that learn to play video games. They did much better, for example, in the military with piloting drones. Those were skills that they have. People that have grown up with technology and with the internet actually have skills that they're bringing to the workplace that we didn't have when we first came in. And so I do think you're hitting a key point, maybe not for this little cycle that we're dealing with right now with space, but this is why you've got to focus and you've got to continually refresh it, because even if you do everything right and get it right for this cycle, you're going to have to change again quickly for the next cycle. So I think that's, it's not a one and a done type of thing with this. I think looking at your space, figuring out what you need, using a lot more data, the integrations about technology. Like I know you guys are doing a lot of work with integrating the data from occupancy planning with BMS systems so that you've got more, real-time work with your energy as an example. This is not a one and done. This is going to become an everyday, moment by moment data utilization and impact the way that we operate and manage our buildings. And that's why I think people, again, it can be overwhelming, but you've got to start somewhere. And a big part of that is just starting some of the conversations, rethinking the way you look at metrics, maybe just looking at one location. And we've talked a lot about the how. Let's talk a little bit about the now. If you look at what's going on, your building is either going to have a mortgage event, or it's going to have a sales event. It seems like all the big brokerage houses are gearing up to deal with the capital markets plays, just like we did in the great economic downturn, where a lot of the banks sold off, the more toxic loans, if you will. The building you're in, if you're in a third party leased building, either your lease is going to come up for renewal and that landlord's going to want to keep you there, or the building is going to be sold and the new buyer may want to keep you there. That's a huge negotiation opportunity to, here's what it will take to make me stay, or here's what it will take to get me to move into this building you just bought. And that's why it's so important for people to understand how much space they need and the types of space they need so that they can help their organizations take, advantage of this opportunity. And I do think there'll be some companies, we'll have some stories in a couple of years about companies that really took advantage of this opportunity and did some incredible things for their real estate portfolio, but for their companies also.
Well, the other thing, I've noticed is that the companies that have a very aggressive and very public mandate, we use the word mandate, about returning to the office, you'll find also most of them have a very strong investment portfolio in commercial real estate, or their business is dependent on designing and building buildings. And so you also kind of have to look at the source of the information that you're reading. And is there an ulterior motive other than, collaboration, that we need to get people to come back and use our product, right? If people aren't coming into buildings, and we know for a fact that the number is less, and it could be as much as 50% less than pre-COVID. But the question is, are people measuring it? Do they know what their metrics look like? And I think, it kind of the final thoughts, if you will, because I know we're coming to the top of the hour, is you need to be aware. Number one, you need to be aware of what your numbers are. And the second part is you need to prepare. So first of all, be aware. What do our metrics look like? How are our spaces being used? What type of space do we need to create? And then the second step is prepare. Prepare for what you need to do tomorrow, next month, next year, based on where those numbers are trending. Are they trending up, or are they continuing to trend down? And I think that's really, the final message that I'll leave is be aware. If your answer is I don't know, you're already, way behind the curve. So, Eddy, I know we want to move into a little bit of Q&A.
You've got an emerging role as a marketing officer. Be aware, prepare, and take market share. I would add that. I got a little rhyme there, but I do think just the awareness is so critical. Do the work, prepare for it. And if you do the right things, that study I referenced earlier, you'll end up taking market share. I know we're coming to that. We just asked for questions. If people disagree with us, Darlene and I love it when people challenge our thinking. We won't name your name. If you put in a challenging comment, well, yeah, if we know you really well, we know you're open to it, but we would love feedback, because I think as an industry, the way we all get better is when we share our perspectives or when we challenge some of the thinking. So Darlene and I are very open to that. So invite you to share that as we,
Eddy, I'm going to take this first question coming in about augmented reality. And does anyone see conversations related to the use of digital twins? So absolutely. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the concept of a digital twin, it's taking all the data that we get out of the buildings, and there's literally terabytes of data out of buildings, and creating literally a 3D visual. It's almost like Minecraft, visual replica of the building that's called a digital twin. You can take live occupancy data, live temperature data, live humidity data. You can see fans spinning. You can literally create a building in a digital twin and not only see what's happening, but also do scenario planning, be able to tweak things remotely, to be able to adjust. What happens if I do this? How much money can I save if I do that? So the concept of a digital twin is extremely valuable, and it's possible today. I think there are a lot of companies that are experimenting with the concept of a digital twin, but I do think that the future of building operations is going to be through expanding that concept of a digital twin and being able to literally run those buildings as a digital asset. So, Eddy, what are your thoughts on that?
I totally agree. Totally agree with everything you said. As you were thinking, you were talking about all that data too. Interestingly, I just got a text from somebody watching who didn't want to put their question in the chat, partly because of the role they have. But they asked, don't you think, and I know they're setting me up for this, don't you think AI will help with all this data we have in occupancy planning? And my response to that is, if we've got such bad data or no data, all AI is going to do is get you the bad data faster. And so for people that are putting all of their, eggs in that basket of AI, if you've not done your work on your data, if you haven't figured out your different data sources, you're just going to get bad answers faster. And we don't have enough time. I could walk you through multiple examples on the internet right now of AI giving people bad data. Sometimes it is life-threatening data. There's a CIO that's been working on that and is pointing out how she's actually getting data that would cause her family to have life-threatening type of events because there's just some bad data out there. And so I think that's another thing, we've got to stop as a real estate industry, that has historically avoided technology or been afraid of it. We have to stop waiting on that next big promise or that next big thing. There's real work that's involved in a lot of these things to get the benefits from it.
Well, when you take a look at AI, machine learning, and digital twin, and you combine all those, the use cases for what we were talking about earlier, which is dynamic assignment of space, it is very real. So if you can use AI to take the data around utilization and predict tomorrow what the occupancy is going to be like, and then assign people what floor they're going to be on and what neighborhood they're going to be in based on your predicted utilization. So back to that example I gave about, only using half the building. If you're an employee coming into that building, taking all of those metrics and advising you that your team is going to be on the 3rd floor today, blah, blah, blah. This is your neighborhood. Click here to reserve a space. You take all those technologies and blend them together and throw in the AI, and that's what we're talking about in terms of how buildings are run, not just from a facility management standpoint, but from a day-to-day, utilization standpoint. So I absolutely think when you combine all three of those with the machine learning. Now, let me give you a perfect example of machine learning. And this is a project I worked on when I was at JLL, and we took all of the work orders that are coming into the building on a day-to-day basis, minute by minute, all the hot and cold calls, hot and cold calls, hot and cold calls. And the building started to learn where all the cold calls were coming in. This is in Chicago in November, over the course of a couple of months. And through machine learning, the building adjusted to preheat those areas before the cold calls started coming in. So we got to a point where, going from 300 or 400 hot and cold calls a month to literally less than 10 in Chicago in November, because the building started to learn and started to preheat or pre-cool spaces that otherwise were areas that they were getting a tremendous amount of hot and cold calls. So you add that to so that's now employee satisfaction, comfort, health and wellness, energy savings, all of the above. So AI, machine learning, digital twin, but that all goes back to data. And again,
that's right.
Real estate, data. And so we need to turn the real estate industry into a data management industry. Facility managers need to become data analysts, really need to understand how to use that data to be able to run the buildings better and create that better environment.
And I think too, if you think about it, we're saying you need to be an expert in data. You need to, start thinking about AI. Metaverse is going to have an impact. It's almost like you need to be an expert in everything. And, they always say it's not what you know, it's who you know. And that's why, no, IFMA didn't set me up for this, but I do think staying very involved with the industry associations, look at the work that IFMA is doing and the investment it's making and training people. So you don't have to know everything, but you can get enough to understand it. And then you can make connections within the group and get feedback from others, or how are you handling this? Or the example Darlene just gave with machine learning. Well, Darlene, how would we do that? How could we do that? Because that one example, you just brought us back to the beginning. Why would people not want to go downtown in Chicago in the winter? Beautiful city right now, horrid on those big winter days. You don't want to go to the office if you're going to sit there and shiver.
Right.
But where the machine learned and it's made it warmer, that creates a reason for me to go in, or it removes a reason why I would not have gone in. And I think those are the real examples and the types of metrics and the things that we need to do to make sure that we get the right space and that people enjoy the space that we do have in the future.
Absolutely. And I think the next step to that is going to be when the building knows who you are and where you like to sit, and preconditions your space to your particular needs and wants. And so I think that brings us to the top of the hour.
That's a whole nother webinar right there that we could talk about that. There's so many opportunities there. Next time.
I'm ready. So, Eddy, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation.
Darlene.
And thank you for all of you who were able to attend today. Eddy and I are happy to take additional questions, not today, but perhaps in the future we could do another IFMA webinar. And certainly feel free to reach out to us online or on LinkedIn for additional information. So I'll turn it back over to IFMA to wrap up. Thanks, Eddy.
Thanks, Darlene.